Matchmaker.fm connects podcasters and guests. Welcome to Matched, the show where we talk to some of the most incredible guests available for an interview right now. I'm your host, James Mulvany, founder of Matchmaker.fm, and this is Matched.
Hello, I'm James Munton, not that James, this James, and I'm very proud to be on Matchmaker.fm. Is that a nice little plug for you, James? Was that good?
Yeah, that was a good start.
We have to redo that? All right, good.
I think that was good. How are you?
I am very well, thank you very much. It's a little early in the morning here, but because we've got time zones we're dealing with.
We have. Okay, we'll start with a couple of icebreakers like we always do.
Thank you.
Firstly, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Geez, you didn't prepare me for that question, did you? The best piece of advice I've ever been given, I don't know. I never follow any advice. Instinctively, if someone tries to give me advice, I do the opposite.
All right, there we go. That's a good answer.
Yeah. I'm not going to answer any of your questions today.
And this one's maybe a bit easier. What was the last great TV show or movie you just watched?
Oh, I'm very excited about this. It was Behind Her Eyes or something like that. We just finished it. Have you heard of this one?
Yeah, it's good. I've seen it, yeah.
The end was brilliant. Like usually with things that have a twist at the end, I figure them out like in the first 10 minutes of the movie or the series. But this genuinely at the end, I was like, and then it's one of those things that afterwards you talk with your wife about and you're like, oh, that was so good. So I'm so happy because usually those things end up disappointing, don't they? But that was, it kept going all the way to the end and was a good ending. I love it. I
agree. It was a great series. It's worth a watch. So just start off then by telling us about who you are and what you do.
Yes, who is James Munton? What a question. Well, I am a Brit who now lives in all places, Dallas, Texas. I moved to the excited states of America about 25 years ago, and I am a professional magician. I perform educational magic shows, mostly at schools in all over Texas and actually all over America. Mm-hmm. And I've got to perform at the White House a few times, which was lots of fun. And during the pandemic, I've switched over to doing a lot of virtual shows, which has been interesting. And I also have a podcast I do called the Apple Sourced Podcast, which is how I met you.
Absolutely. And so can you tell us about your podcast?
Yes. So pre-pandemic, a good buddy of mine, Michael Alves, who lives around the corner from me, we decided to start a podcast, mainly as an excuse to have midweek beer sessions with friends. Yeah. And we'd invite them over to my living room. And I'm quite fortunate, I guess. I have a bunch of interesting friends. And we would talk about a topic and try a different beer each week. And then at the end, rate it. Yeah. And then the pandemic hit and we couldn't go into my living room anymore with friends, which was sad. But we switched over to doing things online virtually. And I realized what that meant was I could talk and interview people all over the world. So I wasn't limited to who could, turn up in my house. And that's how I, got started with your service, Matchmaker.
And is it a podcast about Mac then? And Apple?
Well, here's the thing. As I told you, I don't follow advice, I don't follow rules, and I make things up as I go along. And so originally the idea was, you have to have a niche, you have to have it about a particular topic. And we were going to do we both like all things Mac and Apple, and so we were going to talk about that. And Sourced was like we were getting sourced while we were talking about Apple, so Apple Sourced. But then we realized that talking about Mac and technology is bloody boring, and the people we were interviewing had lots of fun stories to tell. So we thought, sod it, we'll just talk about whatever, whatever stories they bring to the show. And I think it's really fun. We talk about everything. So depending on who the guest is that week.
So what sort of topics do you talk about? Is it kind of mainly based around like technology, the internet, or is it moved on to everything?
It's got nothing to do with technology. It's funny, every episode of Apple Sourced, I start with the same introduction. I say, welcome to Apple Sourced, the podcast about life, technology, and beer. And then we never talk about technology. So if anyone tunes in hoping to hear tech talk, you're not going to get it. Instead, we talk about religion, and we talk about beekeeping. We had a beekeeper on our show talking about how he makes honey. One of my favorites was Nina G, who I met through your service, who is a comedian with a stutter, and she's a stutterer. So we talked all about stuttering and disabilities. So literally we talk about everything,
Okay. And as that, you mentioned, so like you pivoted. I think is this a kind of a good learning from podcasting then, like a good advice to someone who's maybe like thinking about starting a podcast is you don't necessarily need to keep up with what you first started with?
Well, maybe. When I started the podcast, I looked up, how to do a podcast on the internet, and you get all sorts of advice. And one of the things that a consistent theme is you have to start out with a reason why you're doing it, and what is your purpose, and what are you promoting, and my whole thing is just do things because they're fun. So if you are hoping to make money doing a podcast, you're probably not going to make any because, every big company in the world now is doing podcasts and you can't compete with those. Just do it because you want to have a good time and have fun. So, my advice to people starting out is it going to change? Hopefully, yes. Because if you're doing the same thing in 6 months' time that, you were doing when you started, how boring is that? I hope you're doing something different. You are doing something different. I mean, you started out with the podcast hosting part of things, right? And now you moved into matchmaking guests and hosts. So you're always moving on to something new,
Dr.
right?
Love, but for podcasters, Yeah, like
Dr. Love.
It's just like
what are you talking about?
Well, that's the thing. We originally built it like Tinder for podcasters, you see. So yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, and I got to tell you, it's quite funny because I'm too old to have been on the online dating thing. I've been married. I just celebrated my silver wedding anniversary. I know I only look like I'm 30, but I've been married 25 years. So I never did any of the well, thank you. I never did any of the online dating thing. I've never done it. And so the first few times when I went on your matchmaker service, it actually felt like finding a date because you're sending off the message saying, "Well, I hope they like me. I hope I presented myself in a good light." And then equally, when you get their response, sometimes you're like, "Uh-oh, that's a nut job. I don't want to interview them." Okay,
so that brings us on nicely to how have you used the platform and what kind of connections have you made using the service? Like, has it been a productive tool for you?
Absolutely, yes. One of the hardest things if you're doing a podcast with a different guest each week is to find that different guest each week. And, you'd think there's a billion people out there, but, they're not all people you want to interview for your podcast. And so one of the nice things about the Matchmaker service, this is just a big plug for your service, isn't it? This is not about me at all. I've just realized your little scheme here. Anyway, but the good thing about the Matchmaker service is you can filter down and, search for different guests by topic and genre. You can search where they are. I can't remember, is there a way to exclude certain types of people? Because that's what I would like. That would be a good handy feature. If you could have an exclude all nut jobs filter, that would be very handy.
We'll need to work on that one. I think this is something like we probably need to has AI reached a nut job level yet? I mean, I think Twitter are blatantly struggling with that when you look at some discussion threads on Twitter. So
that's
probably
very true.
Probably be a while before AI could eradicate crazy people from the internet. I mean, it's a nice thought, though, isn't it?
Actually, and I'm joking because some of the best guests have been the nut job who would call themselves nut jobs. I mean, just interesting people. And so I tell you one thing that I immediately delete. I'm not interested. Is when I reach out to someone on your matchmaker service, and the reply I get is from like a personal assistant, and they try and act all like kind of high and mighty. And then you're like, if this person hasn't got time to get back to me, that's not the sort of person I'm interested in talking to. But actually, a couple of times I've said, but you know what? You sound interesting, Miss Personal Assistant. Maybe we could have you on as a guest.
That's never replied. I think, I just see what you mean there. It's an interesting point, isn't it? But, I guess sometimes people are, they running a podcast can be very time consuming, can't it? So people do have like virtual assistants or PAs that kind of assist.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, I understand that. But what's funny is sometimes you get the feeling that actually it's not their personal assistant. They're pretending to be their personal assistant to make them look more busy. Yeah. There was one person, she was like a first-time author, and I'm an author. I've had a book published, so I know what. So she was pretending to be her own personal assistant, and then she was trying to make herself out to be extremely busy. And in the end, I was like, this is your first book you've published. Maybe you can act like this when you're Stephen King and you've had 100 books published. But come on, come back down to earth.
The other thing as well is anyone can publish a book these days. It's really easy, isn't it? Like I've had a book published, which I didn't even write, actually. Right.
Yeah. Well, I did write my book, James.
So okay. That brings us nicely. Could you tell me about your book then?
Yes, well, I've had a couple. I did one book self-published and one had published by a very prestigious publisher. And but the book that I had published was about cons and scams and identity theft. One of the things I do, not so much now, but have done a lot over the last 10 years, is speaking events as an expert. And you can't really be an expert unless you've had a book published. And it was interesting. When I was writing the book, I interviewed an FBI agent, a retired FBI agent who'd cracked some huge cases. And he said he retired and tried to become a public speaker and he couldn't get hired. And the moment he had a book published, suddenly he was an expert, and then people would take his calls and want to hire him. So it's amazing. Yeah, it's sad but true. If you want to be a speaker.
And do you think that's helped in terms of podcasts that you've been a guest on as well?
You know, I haven't been a guest on a lot of podcasts, to be honest. It's not something I don't really have any interest in people listening to my podcast, to be honest. It's not something that I watch the numbers and feel like I need to grow the audience. We literally do it for a bit of fun. I mean, there is no reason why I'm actually talking to you right now. There's nothing in it for me. I'm only doing this to help you and your service, James.
Have you been on any podcasts or talk about magic then?
I have actually. I've been on a few. One of the weirdest things I did is during the pandemic, everyone has turned their house into an indoor gym, and they've got like treadmills and bicycles. And there's a thing called Zwift. I don't know if you know what it is. It's basically you have an indoor bicycle and you hook up to the internet, and on your screen you can ride with other people. And people have started Zwift groups where they all get on at the same time and start riding together. And one of these groups, it's a huge group. They have like several hundred members. They go on their virtual bike rides together, but they like to have an interview while they're riding. And so I basically was being interviewed by this guy puffing and panting as he's doing his virtual bicycle. And also because of the time zone difference, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. So I was like half asleep. So that was a weird one. But yes, I've done I've done a few podcasts for different shows. And I have done a couple where, I've talked about magic. But again, because podcasts are mainly an audio thing. They're not a visual thing. People, it's interesting. Some big podcasts that I listen to, you go to their YouTube channel and they've got very few views because people don't want to watch a podcast. They want to listen to it. And so magic is actually quite challenging. It's not impossible, but it's a bit of a tricky one to do when they can't see you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Do you think podcasting is... Do you think it's different to video then? Like, do you have there's a clear separation between
James,
audio and video?
because one you hear and the other one you see.
Yeah, but the argument is there's lots of podcasters who do video as well. So, for example, Joe Rogan's like the classic example.
Yeah. What would the numbers tell you though? Because obviously a lot of people do use YouTube to work, but actually also a lot of people use YouTube to listen. They're not actually watching. And
that's true.
And so I think podcasts by their very nature are something that people like to have on their headphones while they're doing the gardening or doing the dishes, or it's or driving in the car somewhere. It's one of those things. And to be honest, I mean, I'm a very attractive man, but James, you could do a bit of work there. But honestly, people don't want to watch us two sat here like this behind a couple of microphones. They don't. Yeah. That's not interesting. But listening is much better. And also the kind of that's one of the great things about podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to way more podcasts than I watch YouTube videos, for example,
right.
Because I enjoy that really being engrossed by a conversation and listening to 2 or 3 people really talk about something in detail, which is why I'm very disappointed, James. We only have 20 minutes today because I feel I could talk with you a lot longer.
I agree. I mean, it's maybe time for we could record another episode another day. There's always time for a second one, right?
Yes, of course. Any time for you, James. Any time.
Thank you. Okay, so
you're very good at this, by the way. I'd like to ask you: Have you done a lot of podcasts as a host? You've done a few of these now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And what's some advice you would give people about hosting?
So I think, firstly, have a clear kind of outline of what you want to discuss for each episode.
Don't do that. I need to do that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'll tell you one thing you did, which was very helpful for me, is you send your confirmation email. You actually have a list of questions, that you might ask. I know you haven't really asked me any of them, but it's still quite nice for you to do that, to prepare your guest. And also your instructions are really clear. It's one of the struggles is it doesn't matter how many times you tell people, they say, you tell them to restart their computer, close all their tabs like you did, have headphones, have a decent microphone. And then they've done none of that. And they show up, you can't see them, you can't hear them, they sound like crap. That's actually one of the biggest pain points of all of this for me. Is
getting guests who have got decent quality audio.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's so much work afterwards having to clean it all up and fixing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think also sometimes people have got the microphone. This is a common mistake I see people making. They'll go out and buy a USB microphone, and then whatever software they're using to actually do the interview or to record with, they'll forget to select it as the device.
Right.
So by default, it will still just be using they'll be right up close talking to the microphone.
Yes.
But then they'll sound, like the back ear because they're still just actually being recorded via the
headphones.
built-in.
They've got the headphones in, but you're getting all the echo because the sound is actually coming out their computer. Yeah. They're not using their headphones, even though they're wearing them.
So that's a common mistake. I see that people making that time and time again. And I think I do agree. Audio is important. If you're going into podcasting, listeners fatigue if they're hearing bad audio, if there's too much background noise, or if there's it's really echoey or really poor quality.
Yeah.
It will reduce the amount of time that people feel like they can listen for, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, exactly. If you're only listening to something, there's nothing worse than the audio. And they actually also say, even if you're watching video, if a video has poor audio, that's worse than a video having poor video. Just that there's something about our ears. We're sensitive to that. The other pain point for me has been actually the technology of recording these things. I've never used Welder, but I use a similar thing called Squadcast, and both obviously do a very similar thing. But almost every episode, well, not every record, but almost every recording, you drop out. We lose a guest. I mean, it happened to us just now, and both of us. I'm assuming. I mean, I have great internet here. I mean, I don't know what the speeds are, but it's ridiculous. But still, these services aren't quite at the level they should be yet.
No, I agree. I think they're not. And weirdly, a lot of people still use Zoom, which is actually quite reliable.
It's got a lot better, actually. It's got, in the last year, it's got better.
Yeah. But the quality, I don't think, is as good as on Zoom. No. So this kind of, your ups and downs of both sort of different services. The benefit of one of these services is they record on both ends. So you get that local, uncompressed recording, which is uploaded.
Right.
And that gives you great, capability to
and
edit
their backups,
after.
which are really useful. A couple of times I've got there and the audio, there's been an issue with it, and I've contacted with Squadcast anyway. I've contacted them, and they back up everything, so they've sent me a whole backup, which was useful. So yeah.
Okay, cool. If you could be on any podcast, what would it be?
Any podcast, what would it be? Well, I don't know if I really want to be on the podcast, but one of my favorite podcasts is the Arse Blog podcast, because I'm an Arsenal fan. And actually, there was probably one of the first podcasts I got into. And I think he is really good at what he does. Once you start doing these podcasts, you realize how difficult it can be. And then you also start being able to admire when someone else does a good job of it. And he does a really good podcast. He's funny, he's entertaining, but it's informative. And so I would like to talk about Arsenal for an hour with Andrew on Arseblog.
There we go. Perfect. And just to finish up, James, because we were talking about this before we hit record, tell us about your background, because I think that's really interesting. Well, because it looks, at first glance, I thought you were on one of those sort of virtual Zoom backgrounds,
Yes. Well, I've played around with green screen and tried green screen, and anytime I see anyone using green screen, I can tell, and it doesn't look that great because you have to have perfect lighting. And so, I'm in a room now where if I took down this, for people who aren't watching this, I have basically a 9-foot wide backdrop. It's like a photographer's backdrop. You can buy them on Amazon for very little money. And it's basically thumbtacked, pinned into the wall, because behind the wall is just a bare, boring wall to look at. Your background's a bit interesting because you're kind of like looking straight at a wall, and you've got the rest of the room behind you. But I've got the room in front of me, so literally it would just be a bare wall. So just to make it a little bit more interesting, I've got a backdrop up there, and I find the actual printed backdrops, they're made of, I don't know, they're like a plastic material. but they just give a little bit of interest. It means it's not too busy. And right now I've got kind of like a newsroom backdrop behind me. And so that's what I use.
And you said you've got a few different ones as well.
And I've got a bit of a problem. I'm developing a bit of an addiction to buying backdrops, and so I've got about 20 of them now. But the other thing that's funny is that we don't really do our podcast as a visual thing. So the only person who sees this backdrop is the guest. No one else really goes to see it. But actually, when I do the main reason I have the backdrops is for when I wear my other hat and I'm doing virtual magic shows. So I have them back there for those things.
So what are some of your favorite backdrops that you've got apart from this one?
That makes me sound really sad when you say, what are some of your favorite backdrops,
Well, you
James?
mentioned you've bought quite a few,
That's
so I thought it's worth asking.
Worse than being a stamp collector. I mean, you've just turned me into a backdrop collector.
Well, you said you were. So.
Well, I like this. I've got also another big one, which is a kind of an old country house drawing room with a library and a fireplace. Right. And the tones are all kind of like browns and golden, so that's kind of nice. Yeah. I've got another one that I use because I do a spy show for the kids, a secret agent. I'm a secret agent magician, James Wand, the spy magician. So I've got kind of a high-tech spy kind of background that I put up. And that's the other nice thing. They're very lightweight and they've just got like push pins in. So it takes me literally about 5 seconds to pull one down and put the other one back up.
Okay, super. Just to finish up then, James, how can people find out more about you? How can they get in touch?
You can go to my website at jamesmunton.com, or if you'd like to check out the podcast, it's the Apple Sourced Podcast, and the website for that is applesourcedpodcast.com.
All right, James, thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Good luck with everything.
There is an easier way to get booked onto more podcasts as a guest. Join matchmaker.fm for free today and start making connections with podcasters who are looking for guests just like you.